A Whoosh, Chapter 11. They had been back in paradise for one whole happy month when Damien and Franz rediscovered the old go-karts they had built before the flood. While the cleanup had been underway, the professor and Evan had stored the carts in the North Forest. It wasn't an area that many of the tinies frequented, mostly because it was decorated with creepy black pipe cleaner spiders, and Odin and Ponzi insisted it was their private property. Once the go-karts had been found, the evening games ceased, and many of the teens rushed from dinner to rumble down Rose's Hill, which no longer had a bump. Before long, racing challenges became the most eagerly anticipated event. However, there were 4 who didn't participate. Dia was very busy sewing. Odin and Ponzi usually did their own thing. And Amy had not gone go-karting since the accident. She hadn't even stepped foot on Rose's Hill, as the memories were still too painful. Once the evening game ceased, Amy decided she would feed the animals while the others raced. She wanted to keep them tame. Working every day in the store, it was easy for Amy to collect the fruit and vegetable scraps that she knew the squirrels and deer would love. Bags of birdseed pellets and dog and cat kibble were kept in the store, so she collected some of this as well into her carry cart. On her way to Rainbow Hill one evening, after the new activity had been rediscovered, Vahid and Kenzie met her on the stone road. "Hey, want to go-kart with us?" Kenzie asked. Glancing quickly at all the kitchen scraps, pebbles, and kibble she was pushing, Kenzie's thoughtful gray eyes filled with doubt. "Or are you busy?" "I'm never go-karting again," Amy said sadly with a shake of her head. "Because of the accident?" Kenzie inquired. Amy nodded. Her deep blue eyes were mournful. "I never want to hurt another person on that hill," she told him. "Aw, come on, Amy," Kenzie argued. "There hasn't been another accident since Zahir and I leveled off that bump. It's completely safe." Unconvinced, Amy shook her head. Vahid spoke up. "Georgia was scared at first," he relayed, "but Zahir helped her to try again." Amy was surprised to hear from Vahid. Dark-haired and pale-skinned, he was a rather quiet young man. "I'll drive if you want," Kenzie offered, "and you can just enjoy the ride. I'll go really slowly." For a moment Amy hesitated. Tall, curly-haired Kenzie was a very trustworthy tiny. Standing in the sunshine, his pale, freckled face shone in a friendly fashion. She knew she was missing out on a lot of fun, but still she shook her head. "No, thanks for asking," she said politely, unable to explain the voices of fear and guilt that echoed inside. Instead, she had a ready excuse. "All the animals are waiting for me to bring them their scraps. I've decided to spend time with them in the evenings." Looking a little dejected, Kenzie shrugged. With a darting glance in his friend's direction, Vahid added one last assurance. "If you ever change your mind, you can just tell us." "Okay," she nodded. "Thank you." Damien, Lima, and Franz also met her before she reached Rainbow Hill. Emma was trotting along beside the Beach Boys. "You're going the wrong way," Damien smiled. "All the fun is on Rose's Hill. Come on." "The animals are waiting for me," Amy explained. "I want to keep them tame." "You've got to try go-karting again someday," Damien encouraged. "And surfing." Amy smiled. "I really don't think either are for me," she replied. "Aw, come on, Amy," he said disappointedly. "Don't be a whoosh. You loved it. I know you did." With a puzzled look, she inquired, "What is a whoosh?" "You can't give up on things," he implored. "Just because accidents happen sometimes, you can't stop trying. Accidents are just a part of learning." Looking down at her cart, Amy felt hurt. She realized a whoosh wasn't a complimentary term. Flatly, she replied, "I'm taking food to my friends tonight." "Well, watch out for strange animals," Damien warned, with a teasing smile on his handsome face. His gold heart medallion sparkled in the setting sun. Franz growled low in his throat, and Lima stood tall and made himself look scary. Emma barked nervously, unused to such strange noises. "Freddo is up on the hill," Amy laughed, unperturbed. "He'll look after me, and colors will attack anyone who sneaks up in the dark." All the Beach Boys made the strange animal sound again, but Amy just made a face and continued on her way. However, it occurred to her that she had never got the guys back for the scare they had given her and Georgia. That was just before the flood, she considered with a smile. All our plans were interrupted, but we could do something now. Heading up the hill by herself, Amy whistled. She smiled happily as the squirrels jumped from tree to tree, running toward her at the sound of the familiar call. Pulling a fruit core and some peel from her cart, she threw them in the direction of her frisky friends. Zoe, the large fawn, bounded out of the trees and gobbled them up first. Amy scattered the birdseed pellets on the ground. Colors soared down from the sky and landed on her shoulder. He rubbed his feathered head up against her neck, tickling her skin. Laughing, she offered him a piece of Nancy's bread. From her morning sessions in the kitchen, she had discovered that Colors loved bread even more than the birdseed pellets that came in on the train. He had often flown through the window to steal tasty portions, regardless of Milan's insistence that all birds and animals eat outside the store. Amy didn't have the heart to chase him away, but Milan certainly did. Standing in the clearing, Amy told her little bird, "This is your special treat. Come and get it." Colors hopped down her outstretched arm to reach the bread. He chirped noisily with gratitude. "You are so loud," Amy laughed affectionately. She watched him peck at the tasty crust in her hand. Flash and Sky heard the chirp and came to join the feast. Colors squawked greedily, scaring the other birds away so he could finish his morsel. "That's not very nice, Colors," Amy reprimanded as the other birds picked at the pellets. "I have enough food for everyone." The 3 red squirrels scrambled into her cart and began nibbling at the heap of food. Once Colors had finished his treat, Amy pushed the scraps up to the very top of the clearing. Freddo, who no longer had the energy to run up and down hills, was lying alone in the grass. He waltzed over to her, wagging his tail. Amy gave him a handful of kibble, even though she knew Zahir always fed him well. Zoe and Zeddy came prancing out of the forest. One gray, lop-eared rabbit peeked out from behind the trees. It was quite unusual to see a rabbit on the hill, since most were content to stay near the large compost pile at the store or raid the gardens. Standing on the high green knoll of Rainbow Hill with the brilliant purpley-pink colors in the crisscross sky above, Amy felt very peaceful. Feeding her furry and feathered friends was an enjoyable evening activity. Freddo nuzzled her hand and she sat down to cuddle him. "Oh, your fur is so soft," she murmured with delight. Pressing her face into his neck, she stroked the rippled hair along his back. "I love you, Freddo. I love you so much," she said. Giving her a grateful lick on the face, the old golden-haired dog tried to climb onto her lap. With her arms around Freddo, Amy was content to watch all the animals find their favorite tidbits. Until Colors returned to her shoulder and began to jealously nip at the dog. "Hey," Amy said, picking him up on her finger, pulling him away from Freddo. "This is my friend too. I love both of you." But Colors wasn't willing to share. He flew at Freddo and bit his ear. Freddo jumped up with his tail between his legs and ran off. The brightly colored bird returned triumphantly to Amy's shoulder. "I'm not impressed," she told him as he nibbled at her hair. "You didn't need to scare Freddo." Standing up, she placed Colors on a tree branch. He squawked noisily at her. "No, it's not my fault," she told him firmly. "You need to learn to share me with the others." For the next hour, as the sun faded from view and the twilight settled in, Amy tried to pat all the animals. The squirrels were the least inclined to cuddle. They stayed close by, but they had too much energy to sit still. However, she could pick up the gray rabbit and hold it close. It nestled into her arms. "Oh, I love your long ears and your little twitching nose," she murmured softly. The older deer were timid, but if Amy had food in her hand, they would venture over and accept a few pats. Little fireflies flitted about, and loons called out from down below. Still young and immature, their yodels were only beginning to be defined. Flash and Sky stayed in the trees, singing pretty songs, but keeping a wary eye on the sulking lorikeet. And Freddo? Well, he could never get enough attention. He came creeping back to Amy and stayed as close to her as a jealous bird would permit. It was quite dark when Amy began to hear the noisy exodus of everyone heading home for the night. As the voices became louder, the deer ran off into the woods, the squirrels scurried up to the tops of the trees, and the gray rabbit scampered away. Even the birds stopped singing when the happy chatter reached the top of the hill. Georgia and Zahir led the way and were surprised to see Amy sitting with Freddo on her lap. "Zahir went the farthest tonight," Georgia cheered, "and I was in the back, so we won." Amy nodded and tried to smile, but she found it difficult. 2 of her best friends were having a great time together, but not with her. Lily, Santa, and Milan were right behind. "Why are you sitting out here all alone?" Santa asked compassionately. "I wasn't alone," Amy replied. "All the deer, the squirrels, and the birds were with me. Even one gray rabbit came for the scraps tonight." Zahir looked over to see the empty cart, but he didn't say anything. "You're missing out on all the fun," Lily exclaimed. "I don't do go-karting," Amy said, hugging Fredo. "At least not anymore." "It's very good that someone is looking after the animals," Georgia chided Lily. "Amy's keeping them well fed and tamed. That's important." "Maybe we could help," Zahir began. Georgia frowned. "And miss out on go-karting? No way!" With a smile in her housemate's direction, she assured him, "Amy's looking after them all just fine, and she hates go-karting." Amy didn't protest, even though it wasn't true that she hated go-karting. She simply struggled with painful memories from the past. It was all very hard to explain. Zahir shrugged. "See you tomorrow," he said, with a smile in George's direction, but no more than a passing glance toward Amy. "Good night. I love you, Zahir," Georgia called out. "I love you too," he replied cheerfully. Amy felt a terrible stab of jealousy. Georgia had not yet claimed Zahir. Is it right to tell someone you love them before you claim them? She wondered. Fredo left Amy and bounded after his master as Zahir and Milan took the path to their home in the forest. Feeling mystified, Amy stood up and watched the 2 young men walk into the woods. Why has Zahir stopped being my friend? She wondered sadly. Ever since they had returned to paradise, he had been distant and rarely talked to her. With a deep sigh, she put her nose in the air. Well, it doesn't matter, she thought haughtily. Likely I'll claim Damien. As she followed the laughing girls into the house, Amy did admit to herself that she was missing out on time with friends in the evenings. But her fears were hard to overcome. I also love my quiet time with the animals, she told herself. I can't do both. It was very dark inside the house when they entered the door, since the veranda roofs shaded the windows from any moonlight on the first level. The girls had to feel their way up the stairs to their rooms. Lily stubbed her toe and yelled out. Dia, who was in her bedroom already, called out in annoyance. I'm sleeping! Keep your voices down! The other girls giggled quietly. Is that the toe that Damien stepped on? Santa whispered. Yes, Lily moaned softly, and he is so heavy. A strange animal noise sounded in the distance, then laughter. Not that again, Georgia whispered at the top of the stairs. Moonlight shone through the second-story windows, and Amy wanted to make up for missing out on all the fun. Girls, we need to have a chat, she said softly. Come into my room. Georgia, Lily, and Santa followed Amy into her room and pounced onto her big white bed. With her large floor-to-ceiling windows, enough light came in to see each other dimly, although they could only see the whites of Santa's eyes and her teeth when she smiled. Amy shut the door so they wouldn't disturb Dia. It's time to get the guys back, she said mischievously, pulling her long copper-brown braids into a bun and pacing around the room. They tricked us badly. What prank can we play on them? Hide their surfboards, Santa suggested. That would make them upset. Yes, and mad, Amy contemplated. Is there something we could do that would just be funny? We could loosen their hammocks, Lily laughed. Then when they climb in, they'll fall. Yes, Amy considered, that would be funny as long as they weren't hurt. We could throw things at them while they're sleeping, Georgia smiled. Just little things that don't hurt, and they won't know where they're coming from. With a quiet laugh, Amy liked the suggestion. As she considered what soft materials could be thrown, bird feathers came to mind. She remembered how much they tickled. That is a good idea, she contemplated with a smile, and then she laughed as an even better idea came to her. We could even tie little downy, tickling feathers to a string on a long pole and dangle them on the guys early in the morning while they're still asleep. All the girls laughed, imagining the scenario. There was another angry outcry from Dia, so they quickly hushed their voices. Georgia thought it through. We'll have to get up early before the Beach Boys wake up, she whispered. And we need to figure out how to sneak down without them seeing us, Santa added, rubbing her hands together eagerly. Ooh, I just love this plan. And where to run if they chase us, Lily giggled softly. Okay, Amy said, standing up straight enthusiastically. So we won't do it for a couple of days. We'll just scout things out and make our plans. How do we wake ourselves up? Lily inquired. She never woke before the sun was up. Confidently, Amy replied, Colors usually start singing outside the window as soon as there is light in the sky. My room brightens fast. I usually wake up early. Santa was also certain it would work. Whoever wakes up early can wake up all the others. Okay, they agreed excitedly. See you tomorrow, girls, Georgia smiled mischievously. Happy prank planning dreams. Will you all be quiet? Dia yelled out. We're going to bed now, Georgia assured her. Good night, everyone. Early one morning, Chapter 12. It was harder than the girls thought it would be to find feathers. They scoured the forest for hours before they found enough to attach 2 to each string. The scouting mission was easier. When all the guys left to go go-karting that evening, the girls had ample opportunity to make their plans. Making a new path down through the forest toward the beach where the hammocks hung, they were confident they could approach without being seen. A group of thick firs part way up the hill would be a great hiding place for their escape. Colors faithfully began his song the next morning, just at the light of dawn. Opening her eyes, Amy glanced out the windows to see pale golden highlights on the dark water. With a happy, mischievous smile, she slipped out of bed and braided her long hair. Then she pulled on her new sundress, specially made by Dia, complete with multicolored sequin flourishes. Tiptoeing ever so quietly so that Dia wouldn't be disturbed, Amy woke her friends. The girls made their way out of the house and silently closed the door behind them. Amy gathered the tickle sticks from their hiding spot under the deck. She handed each girl one, and then they began the descent through the trees. It was still dark enough that the girls couldn't see very well in the forest. They had to walk slowly so they didn't step on anything that might make a noise. The sky began to grow pink as they approached the Beach Boys, and then they remembered that Emma slept under Damien's hammock. Oh no, Amy whispered. Emma will wake them all up. They stood for a moment wondering if their plan had failed. I know what to do, Santa whispered. Emma loves apples. If I show her one, maybe she'll follow me to the farmyard. If she doesn't bark, you'll be okay. Lily looked over. I'll show Emma the apple, she offered quietly, handing Santa her tickle stick. I can't run fast, so I know the guys will catch me. Santa happily accepted the stick. Now she had 2. Thank you, Lily, Amy whispered gratefully. Lily nodded and headed quietly to the orchard to pick an apple. Emma opened her eyes and looked up the moment she heard Lily approach. Thankfully, she didn't bark, and eagerly came for the treat. When Lily had enticed the dog all the way to the meadow, the girls crept past the last few eucalyptus trees. There was no doubt that Amy was planning to tickle Damien. Georgia wanted to get Franz back, and Santa silently tiptoed towards Lima. One by one, they knelt down and carefully dangled the feathers just above the soundly slumbering teenagers. Amy began with the downy feathers on Damien's bare chest. She made it gently scoot across to his shoulder. Damien groaned and turned over toward the lake. The downy feathers ran along his face. Sleepily, his weary hand came up and brushed the feathers away. Allowing him a moment to fall back to sleep, Amy then ran the feathers along his shoulder. Damien's arm jerked up in the air and he rolled to the other side. The other young men were receiving similar treatment. For several minutes, the tickle torture continued. Many giggles were suppressed with great difficulty as the Beach Boys became more and more agitated. Trying not to laugh, the young ladies could hardly look at each other. Pale pinks and bright yellows were bursting through the sky and reflecting onto the lake as the downy feathers bounced on noses, ran back and forth on ears, swept across foreheads, and scurried down necks. At last, Damien swatted hard at the annoying pest and realized it was attached to a string. His big brown eyes opened wide as he gazed upward in amazement to see the string was attached to a twitching pole. Quickly running his eyes down the pole, he was astonished to see Amy. At that moment, Amy knew she needed to run, but all her suppressed giggles burst out and she started laughing too hard to move. "You little pest!" Damien yelled, waking up his friends. Jumping out of the hammock, the golden-haired beach boy caught Amy easily. "You're going surfing now," he laughed, slinging her over his shoulder. Amy protested and fought back, but she was no match for the strong young man. Holding her firmly over his shoulder with one arm while she kicked and yelled, Damien grabbed his surfboard with the other. He dashed into the lake, taking his precious cargo with him. In a moment, Amy found herself fully submerged in the water and came up gasping for breath. The other guys easily captured Georgia and Santa. Screams of delighted resistance awoke all the inhabitants of Paradise that morning as the three girls were given a dunking. Seeing that Amy was floundering in the water, Damien passed his board to her and she clung on. "Time for your first surfing lesson," he teased. "But there aren't any waves," she argued, looking at the calm water. "How can I surf without waves?" "It's the best time to try," he encouraged. "I'll be the wave." She looked up with a puzzled expression. "Hop on," he told her. "First you need to learn to keep your balance. Try to stand up and I'll give you a ride." Damien helped her onto the board. He held her feet while she tried to stand. "Are you ready?" he asked. "Yes," she said, a little tentatively. Pulling the board by the rope he had attached to one end, Damien moved it slowly. Amy struggled to stay on. "Bend your knees," he directed. "Keep your arms out." Amy positioned herself. "Ready for a ride?" Excited, nervous, and hoping to prove that she wasn't a whoosh, whatever that was, Amy nodded. Damien swam underneath to the back of the board and began pushing. At first, he kept it slow, but then he picked up speed. Desperate to succeed, Amy stayed on, and Damien added a few bumps and turns. One turn threw her off into the water with a big splash. But Damien was quick to extend his arm. "Fun?" he asked. "It is," she agreed, and she wasn't lying. "Do you want to try again?" "Sure." Amy could see that Georgia was also on a board. The blonde-haired girl was shaking badly, and Franz was mocking her fear. "What are you so afraid of, silly?" he called out. "It's just water. Amy's catching on fast. What's wrong with you?" "I don't like it," Georgia protested. "I want to go in." Santa and Lima were swimming over to the pier. Amy was impressed to see how much Santa had learned. After quite a few turns on the board, gradually building her confidence, Amy heard barking on the beach. Looking over as Damien pushed her along, she saw that Fredo had made his way down the hill and was now watching her, waiting for his morning cuddle. She noticed that Sahir and Fahid were fishing nearby in the Red Bird. Seeing the boat that she had helped Sahir build evoked fond memories. For a brief moment she watched the fishermen, and then Damien made the surfboard curve quickly. When she maintained her balance and didn't fall off, he called out, "Hey, you're getting this!" Feeling a sense of accomplishment, Amy tried even more. This isn't as hard as it looks, she thought. While Amy was enjoying the ride and Santa and Lima were jumping off the pier into the water, Georgia quit early, upset with France. When everyone began walking to the store for breakfast, those still on the lake decided it was time to head in. "We should do this every morning," the handsome young surfer suggested to Amy, tucking his board under his arm. "Or you could come down in the afternoon when the waves are rolling in. That's when the real fun begins." Wading into shore, Amy looked up with interest. "I need to help with breakfast, but I'd like to give it a try," she said bravely. "Really?" Damien smiled. "Yes, maybe not today, but later on this week." "Okay, I'm going to hold you to it," he told her. "Or you might encounter more strange animals in the woods." With a laugh, Amy shook her head. "You couldn't fool me again." "Oh no?" Damien challenged with a glint in his eyes. Realizing she was setting herself up for another scare, Amy hastily retracted her statement. "Actually, you probably could." Damien laughed, and Amy ran up the hill to change into dry clothes. The Unfair God, Chapter 13. It was a Friday, and Valentine's Day on top of that. Two of Professor Lemann's students had brought chocolate hearts to thank him for being such a great teacher. He was feeling quite happy about the little tokens of gratitude as the students handed him their tests and filed out of the auditorium to head home for the weekend. Seth, the tall, red-haired Christian, was one of the last to exit. He was discussing something with another student as they packed up their laptops to leave. "But don't you see," Seth was saying, "it was Christians in the past who discovered many of the laws of science because they expected the universe to be just like their creator, absolute, rational, and dependable, with logical mathematical laws that can be tested and relied upon consistently. We don't have to worry that we might wake up tomorrow and discover gravity is now pushing instead of pulling, and we're all falling off the earth." Absolute? There is no absolute truth, Kylie argued with a frown. "Then are you sure that statement is true?" Seth challenged. Kylie thought it over. "We're scientists," Seth argued. "We're learning that in science and in math, the laws that govern our world are absolute. Of course there is absolute truth." With a smile, the professor interjected, "Sailors, did you say God was dependable and rational? What Bible do you read? The God of the Old Testament is vindictive, capricious, megalomaniacal, genocidal." "Excuse me, sir?" Seth questioned, stopping in front of his desk. He had read all this in the professor's book and disagreed entirely. "That's rather harsh, don't you think? The God I know is gracious and just. Where do you get these distorted ideas from?" "Just look around at the amount of suffering in this world, and it's easy to see," the professor argued, jabbing his dry erase markers into their box. "But if God were to stop all suffering, sir," Seth reasoned, "then humans could not have free will. We'd be more like robots." "What's wrong with that?" Kylie asked. "You'd want to be a robot?" "If that stopped all suffering," she replied. "If your God had made us robots," the professor smiled, "then he wouldn't have had to spend so much of the Bible telling us off and making rules. He could have had a peaceful existence. If he's so intelligent, why didn't he figure that out?" Taken off guard, Seth frowned. It did seem it would be a lot simpler if God had just made beings who would always do what was right. He pondered his response. He thought about his own experiences with young nieces and nephews. And then he thought about his neighbor's dogs, which lived on either side of him. One was a bad-tempered Doberman that barked all the time, and the other a well-trained golden retriever that everyone loved. "Well," the red-haired student began, "if you had two dogs, and one was a robot that was programmed to do everything perfectly, and the other was a real dog that was easy to train because it loved you and wanted to please you, which one would bring more joy to your life?" Kylie nodded. She pondered. "A robotic dog might perform the task well, but you wouldn't really feel that it cared about you. It would just be a machine." Nodding, Seth added, "You couldn't have a loving relationship with a robot." With a smile, thinking of the Doberman, Seth added, "And if you had a third dog that was always growling, disregarding your commands, and trying to bite you, would you want to keep that dog? Would it be safe for others if you kept that dog?" The professor stuck his box of markers back in his desk. "Dogs, eh?" he said. "You're comparing us to dogs." With a shrug, Seth added, "God is looking for people who willingly choose to be like their Father because they love him. Real love can't be forced or programmed. It has to be a choice or it isn't satisfying. God has offered us the greatest motivation to turn from sin, living forever in a perfect world with no more tears, pain, or suffering, but first he helps us form strong characters through moral struggle and pain." "Strong characters," the professor quipped bitterly. "I'd say pain weakens us." "But what athlete improves their ability by lying around in a hammock?" Seth frowned. "Like they say, no pain, no gain." Shaking his head, the professor retorted, "I say he should have made us better in the first place." With a frown, Seth held up one hand. "But just a sec, sir," he protested. "He did. When God first made the world and human beings, he looked at his creation and said it was very good. It was not God's choice to bring evil, sin, death, and suffering into his very good world. It was a human choice. God encouraged Adam and Eve to enjoy all the amazing trees he had provided for them, except for the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God told them if they ate from it, they would die. Adam and Eve listened to a lying snake rather than trust their Creator. They felt that God was unfairly and deceitfully barring them from something good rather than something terrible. Looking up and appealing earnestly to the professor, Seth added, "Don't you see that we, humankind, have brought and continue to bring much of the evil, sin, death, and suffering on ourselves? One sin, and the whole creation is cursed. As I said, and others have said, your God is vindictive, capricious, and megalomaniacal." "No, sir," Seth disagreed, shaking his head. "God is honest and trustworthy in every aspect of his universe, his word, even his laws of physics. Every action has a reliable consequence." Stacking the papers on his desk, the professor thought about this for a moment, and then he challenged, "Where's the proof that your God even exists?" "There is so much evidence to believe in God and his promises," Seth smiled. He hesitated for a moment thoughtfully, and then he said, "I'll make you a list." "It would be a complete waste of your time," the professor retorted. "I'm fully convinced there is no God." "If God exists, why can't we see him?" Kylie reasoned. "We'd believe in him if we could see him." Thoughtfully, Seth replied, "We may not see God directly, but he has shown us what we can know about him. That is, his eternal power and divine nature. Romans chapter 1 tells us these invisible aspects of God have been clearly perceived ever since creation, in everything God has made. So we have no excuse for disbelieving his existence. As scientists, we examine his creation closely. When we consider the natural world so complex, so finely calculated and perfectly balanced, it clearly reveals God's immense power and divine nature as a supreme mathematical intelligence, the creator of the universe and all life in it." "Surely," Professor Lemans began in a cool, carefully controlled tone, "with all the advanced scientific knowledge of the intricate workings of the natural world, you don't expect people to avoid using their intelligent minds and just have faith that some unseen power made and controls everything." "You're right, sir," Seth nodded, thankful he had thought through this argument since reading the professor's book in first semester. "I don't expect people to stop using their intelligence when believing in God. In fact, our minds, our consciousness, our awareness of our own existence, our ability to reason intelligently and even perceive and appreciate joy and pain are amazing examples of God's creative power. Top neuroscientists today admit that consciousness is so complex that they lack adequate theories to explain its existence. They admit their attempts to replicate just a basic level of consciousness in machines, like the perception of pain, won't be possible in any of our lifetimes, and realistically probably never. The human mind is so intricate that it could never have occurred by accident through evolution. We were created with the capacity to reason and consider high-level concepts so that we can fathom God's eternal creative power around us. We have the gift to notice and appreciate beauty and even to be creative ourselves, unlike any other animal on earth. God made us this way so we would clearly perceive his existence and so that we would seek after him. That's why I decided to study science." Glancing over at the clock on the wall, Kylie was suddenly anxious. "Hey, we need to get going if we want to catch that bus." Unperturbed by the time, Seth reminded her, "There'll be another bus in half an hour." On a roll, he added, "God has put everything in place so that we have enough evidence if we want to see it. We have a great promise to motivate us. We have forgiveness." As Professor Lemans listened to Seth, he had to admit that there was a little substance to the young man's answers. The discussion had touched a nerve, as it brought to mind Odin and Ponzi's foolish doubts of his own invisible existence. Even if the train came in every day with supplies, and paradise was carefully calibrated for their prosperity. However, he certainly wasn't going to let the good-natured redhead walk off thinking he had won the argument. "Tell me, young man," he challenged, "what kind of loving father would ask his beloved son to die a death of torture and shame? Is that not the epitome of unjust suffering?" The conversation had quickly changed course, and Seth was once again thrown off guard. "But Jesus willingly gave up his life. He chose." Walking a few steps closer, the professor probed deeply. "If you had a loving and obedient son, would you ask him to submit to a brutal Roman crucifixion? Would you publicly shame him by letting him die like a naked criminal on a cross, on display to everyone? Seth didn't have an immediate answer. He turned pale. Kylie nudged Seth. Come on, we can still catch the early bus, she said. You can argue all you want on Monday. With a smile of victory, the professor nodded goodbye to the students as they waved and ran off. It was incredibly unjust suffering, that's what it was, he muttered, stacking the pile of papers he had to mark. If it even happened at all. Amy's Surfing Lesson, Chapter 14. Sitting down beside Amy under the store veranda, Damien asked, Are you coming for your surfing lesson today? He had 2 bread rolls in one hand and an orange in the other. Colors made a move toward Damien's bun, and Amy had to restrain her pet. It was nearly the end of the week, and she still had not come down to the beach. Between fear of the big waves and knowing that Nancy Milan really needed her help with the meals, Amy kept talking herself out of it. Come on, don't be a whoosh. You've got to try a real surfing lesson, Damien encouraged, stuffing his bun into his mouth. Amy did not like being called a whoosh, especially since Damien said it with derision. Privately, she thought, name-calling is very hurtful. I'm sure it breaks the rule. Every day that week, Amy had been wearing a pair of sequined shorts and a t-shirt, thinking she might have the time and courage to take a lesson after lunch when the waves were rolling in. Okay, I'll come, she smiled, giving Colors a piece of her bun and trying to hide her nervousness. Damien was very happy. We'll start easy, he promised. You'll love surfing. Vanitha was sitting nearby with Kenzie and Vahid and overheard. You're going to try surfing? She said in surprise, looking at Amy. Yes, Amy nodded. When are you going to come for a lesson? Damien teased the dusky girl as he peeled his orange. You have 3 invites. With a laugh, Vanitha looked up shyly from under her dark tresses. Yes, 1 for each haircut. She had become Damien's favorite hairdresser. So when will you come? He prodded. Vanitha was tearing off small pieces of bread and eating them slowly. Maybe I'll watch and see how it goes with Amy today, she answered. Damien shook his head in mock dismay as he ate his orange. I don't know why you girls are so worried about this. Surfing is the best thing in life. This is the most fun you'll ever have. Amy and Vanitha exchanged uncertain glances. Kenzie and Vahid mumbled something to each other disgruntledly and left for the farm. Well, I guess I'll find out today, Amy said, finishing off her meal and standing up. Colors flew from her shoulder to the nearby tree. Let's go then, Damien laughed, popping his last orange wedge in. They ran down to the beach. Damien pulled off the shirt that Uncle Louis requested he wear for school and tossed it over a tree branch. His gold necklace shone. He already had his swim shorts on as he never took them off. Running fast, the tall surfer plunged into the waves. Amy waded in slowly. The cool water felt good on her hot skin, but she wanted time to acclimatize. Damien never wasted time. Lesson 1, he called out merrily. Get wet fast! Before Amy could run back to shore, Damien began splashing her relentlessly. Diving under the water was the only way to get him to stop. Quickly, Damien ran back to the beach to grab his surfboard. Can't go out to the deep water for a while, he informed her, as sometimes we'll get bad pains in our stomach if we've just eaten. But that's okay. We can practice near the shore until you get the hang of it. Amy was happy to practice near the shore. She wasn't frightened of the shallow water. Damien demonstrated how he tied the board to his ankle so that it wouldn't float away from him. She followed him out until the waves began reaching her shoulders, and then he showed her how to lie on the board and wait for action. Amy watched as he caught a wave and rowed into shore. He made it look so easy. Now you try, he said, running back. He helped Amy attach the rope to her ankle, and then he held the board for her. Amy laid on the board just like he had done. I'll tell you when to move, he assured her. Amy saw a wave coming toward her and got ready, but Damien called out, It's a whoosh! Let it go! Not hearing exactly what he had called the wave, Amy didn't have time to think. The water rushed under her, lifting her up momentarily and then flowing quickly away. Here comes a good one, Damien called out as Amy wondered how he could tell. Looking behind, she saw a wave gathering in intensity. When the wall of water reached her with all its force, Damien called out, Go! However, she didn't move forward soon enough, and the powerful impact sent her tumbling off the board while it crashed over her head. Gasping for breath, she came up thrashing. She only had very basic swimming skills. Damien was by her side in a moment. After a number of tries, Amy soon got the idea of when to move with the rising water. It was fun, riding into shore. "Time to try standing," Damien encouraged. Over and over, Amy tried to stand, and failed with every attempt. It was much harder than it had been on the calm water. "Come on, Amy," Damien protested after her 11th fall. "It's so easy. Why can't you get this?" His impatience didn't help. "I can't do it," she told him, feeling she might start crying if she was toppled one more time. She felt she had forcefully drunk enough water to last for days. "I'm sorry, Damien," she pleaded. "I'll try again next week." Venitha, Tina, and Yuyan had wandered down to the beach to watch. Santa was heading out with Lima for a lesson. "Just try 5 more times," Damien insisted grumpily, as he helped her back onto the board. "You're not a complete Whoosh. You did it on the calm water. I'm sure you'll get it." Sensing his lack of confidence, Amy tried to think of an excuse. "But wouldn't you rather be surfing yourself?" she asked. "I can surf any time," he shrugged, looking out longingly toward the deep water. "Come on, 5 more times." With all her friends looking on, and knowing there was an end in sight, Amy tried her hardest to get up. "I don't want him to keep calling me a Whoosh," she thought. She listened to Damien's commands and executed them quickly. And she made it. She got up on the board and zoomed in on the wave. She even had time to wave her hand quickly to the girls before losing her balance and toppling in. "You did it!" he called out, smiling proudly. When she brought the board back to him, he gave her a quick hug. "Just 4 more times." Encouraged, Amy tried to ride longer. On her last try, she stood on the board until Damien counted to 5. "Well done!" he shouted, clapping his hands. "Next lesson, you'll be ready for the deep water." Amy looked up with alarm. "But I don't know how to swim." "Don't worry," the blonde surfer consoled her with a grin. "I'll teach you. If you think this is fun, the big waves are 50 times better." As Amy turned to leave, Damien called out, "Was it fun, Amy?" Realizing she hadn't said thank you, she whirled around. "It was fun," she smiled sincerely. "I'm sorry I was scared. Thank you. And thank you for not giving up on me." For a moment she thought about giving him a hug, but she held back. All her friends were watching. They might decide she loved Damien, which she did. But she wasn't quite ready to make a claim. It seemed like a very big decision. "You'll do it again?" "Of course." "How about we do swimming lessons for the next 5 mornings, he suggested, "and then I'll take you out to the deep next week." Wanting desperately to please Damien, Amy agreed. Early morning swims in calm water with the handsome young man did sound fun. "Let's do that," she nodded, "as long as I get to the store in time to make the scrambled eggs and fry the fish." "Nah," Damien replied dismissively. "Nancy and Milan will be fine on their own. Zahir doesn't need fish every morning. He can go without it for a week." With a twinge of conscience, Amy gave her consent. She would only do morning sessions for 1 week. She hoped someone else would fill in for her at the store. Chapter 15. A Morning in Paradise. Before the sun was up, Professor Lemans walked into the Paradise room. Using the flashlight on his phone, he made his way over to his desk. He had a midterm exam to run that morning, and he needed to print it off. As usual, he checked his computer monitoring systems to ensure that the air quality was good, the humidity was at the right level, and the rainmaker had come on during the night. Everything checked out in top form. He saw a message from Evan that the insects were ready to send in, so he took the elevator down to the nursery to collect bees, a new brood of butterflies, the lightning bugs, and load up the train. Louis had texted a list of supplies that were needed, so Professor Lemans sent them in as well. When he arrived back in the Paradise room, the sun was casting gentle rays across the water, and laughter was coming over the sound system. Curiously, he looked in, just in time to see Damien pick Amy up and run into the lake, submerging them both. They came up laughing and splashing each other. Lima and Franz called out for them to be quiet and not wake up the whole world. With a frown, the professor watched the two tinies frolicking below. Flirting, he mumbled. What does she see in Damien? Shaking his head, he reflected, sure, he's good-looking and his attitude is improving, but for the most part he seems to be only out for himself. He sighed deeply. But I'm not interfering, he reminded himself firmly. This is their world, and they need to follow their hearts, not mine. As he downloaded his exam and began printing it off, he heard Damien explaining the basics of swimming and telling Amy she had to keep her face in the water. While Uncle Louis had given all the tinies basic swimming lessons when they had first entered paradise, only the beach boys had truly perfected the skill. The other tinies could keep themselves afloat for a few minutes, but they didn't dare head out to the deep water like the surfers did every day. Let's hope Damien teaches everyone, the professor remarked. Even Louis could do with some lessons. Once all the midterm exams were stacked and stapled together, Professor Lemans walked over to view his beautiful world one more time before classes. He could see Zahir and Odin fishing together in the boat down near the pier. That's unusual that Zahir has Odin with him, he pondered. I'm surprised that Odin would even want to go fishing. This must have been at Zahir's initiation. The two fishermen weren't close to the microphone, so it was hard to hear what they were saying. The professor walked over to the speaker and listened carefully. Yes, every morning, he heard Zahir respond. They aren't hard to catch, and fried fish is so delicious, especially with a little lemon. But you don't get them for breakfast anymore, Odin taunted. No, the dark-haired lad shrugged. Not since Amy's been taking swimming lessons. But maybe someone will fry them for dinner. Or I guess I could learn. Odin was facing away from the nearby microphone, so his voice was harder to pick up. The professor could see him gesturing in a complaining way, but he couldn't hear the words. Sure, it's fair, Zahir argued. I love doing what I can to help out. You should find something that you're able to do that benefits others. It will make you feel happier. The professor could see Odin throw his arms up in the air helplessly. His fishing rod went flying into the water. For one moment, the two young men struggled to get the rod. Odin fell out of the boat, and Zahir had to pull him back in as well. It took the two tinies a while to resume fishing and talking. I'm going to give you some ideas, he could hear Zahir tell Odin. We're both good at building things. You're very strong. We could make a stone stairway up Rainbow Hill. It really needs one. Or we could build you a larger house if your cabin isn't big enough. I loved building my first house. There are lots more dead trees that we could use. Or you and I could build a bigger boat to go fishing in, or... But Odin was shaking his head and looking disinterested. Well done, Zahir, the professor smiled. You're a natural servant leader, and Louis is training you well. This is exactly what Odin needs. A friend who will encourage him to get busy and use his talents constructively. As he watched Zahir's snag of fish, the professor considered Zahir's wistful remarks about building houses. Maybe we shouldn't have put in the new houses and fixed everything up, he thought. Maybe we should have left more for the tinies to do. He pondered the matter. Not ever having children of his own, managing the tinies was a big experiment. Professor Lemans had plenty of idealistic thoughts of how it all should go, but he was beginning to realize not every young person reacted in the same way to the same consequences or motivations. What was helpful for some seemed potentially harmful for others. He loved to give them things and make their lives easier, but maybe that wasn't always for the best. Only 2 more months until Rachel can be involved, he reminded himself. Rachel Khalid, the very knowledgeable biosphere animal doctor, had come from a family of 8. He knew she had plenty of experience. We did all the cleanup because it was easy for us, he considered thoughtfully. But perhaps we deprived the tinies of some meaningful work and a sense of accomplishment. Lima and Franz were now up and appeared to be having a swimming race. Rusty and Emma were chasing each other through the shallow water, while Fredo lay on the pier watching his master in the Red Bird. Damien was holding Amy in a horizontal position in the lake, and it seemed she was getting the front crawl moves, even if she was struggling to keep her face in the water. The new loons and ducks were bobbing along and occasionally diving for their meal. Santa was running down Rainbow Hill toward the gardens. Charlie was already out picking bananas. Likely for breakfast, the professor surmised. Little Bojo, the new beagle, was running around the fences sniffing for intruders. The cows and sheep were grazing on the fresh green grass. Kenzie and Vahid were collecting chicken eggs. The brightly colored birds were flying happily from tree to tree, singing merrily to everyone. Louis was stretching outside his house. Steam from the baking bread was coming up through the store vent. Colors was flying around the store in circles. Deer and rabbits had congregated near the kitchen to pick over the morning offerings. Ooh la la! What a happy place I've created for all these little people and animals, he thought to himself proudly. This is the kind of world I'd love to live in. I'd give anything to live in. I'm so happy that my creation is safe from so many catastrophic things that strike without warning and ideas that cause dissension and strife. Yes, we've had a few mishaps, he admitted to himself, and the flood was slightly catastrophic, but nothing like that should ever happen again. We've found the flaws and fixed them, and now we have a true paradise. Suddenly narrowing his eyes and unconsciously flexing his fist, he added, if there is an unfair God up there, he can't reach my little family down here. I've got them well protected.